Hello, everyone. Welcome to our presentation on Safran risk analysis. Um, my name is Ian Nicholson. I'm going to be the primary presenter this evening. I'm a risk analysis trainer and consultant. I'm based in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. I've been running risk analysis projects or risk analysis on projects for about 20 years, 20 plus years. I started working with schedule risk analysis as the Canadian PERT Master reseller in 2001. Joining me tonight is Mary Lynn Backstrom, who's an expert in P6, risk analysis generally, and has many years experience as well. So why do we conduct risk analysis? Well, there's a number of reasons why we conduct risk analysis, but there's a couple of primary ones. The first one is we want to make sure our project teams and our project executives understand and manage the risks to their projects. We want to get the project team discussing the challenges of their projects, get them focused on the right issues. And when we talk about the right issues, we're talking about near critical things that can come back to haunt the schedule or cost items that can blow the contingency on the schedule. Now, risk analysis is a requirement of many companies' gate approval process, but that's probably the last reason why you should do it. You really want to do it so you can understand the dependencies between cost and schedule. I'm in Alberta, Canada, as I mentioned. In my part of the world, we have a group here called the Construction Owners Association of Alberta. And these are largely oil and gas companies that do mega projects around this part of the world. And they do a number of construction reports. And one that they did a few years ago said that project risk assessment has shown to significantly reduce project cost growth. Now, this was over 10 years ago that they did this. So it's been long recognized that risk analysis is important. So we want to do risk analysis, but do we build our detailed CPM schedules? Do we develop detailed estimates? Well, of course we do. But even though we do those things, the chances of meeting our project schedule and financial goals are still typically a lot less than you realize. How can this be? Well, we do detailed CPM scheduling, but there's a couple of problems there. The first one is that we enter data as finite values rather than ranges of uncertainty. So we say that work's going to take 3 people, 4 days at $100 an hour. Therefore, I know how long it's going to take and how much it's going to cost. The problem with that is that the assumptions about productivity change over time, the assumptions about how much time it's going to take change over time, and sometimes those assumptions don't match reality. Sometimes the project changes. Oftentimes by the time a project gets built, it's not the same project that was originally envisioned. And oftentimes our schedule and our cost estimates don't get updated to match the new scope of work. We do detailed estimating, but sometimes our estimators are too optimistic or too pessimistic. And this is often a problem when we're dealing with lump sum bid processes. It encourages the contractors to be overly aggressive and try and make money up through the change process. On top of that, sometimes people who estimate cost or schedule add their own little contingency. So I was talking to an owner the other day that was saying every time they put contingency in a schedule and make it visible, someone takes it away. Someone says, "Well, we don't need that," and they remove it from the budget. So that what they do is they hide contingency throughout the cost estimate or the schedule. Estimates are often built on historical experience, which may not be true anymore. So the plant that you built 5 years ago or even 10 years ago is not the plant that you're building today. You're dealing with different skill sets in the trades, you're dealing with different technologies in the thing that you're building. It's oftentimes changing very quickly. The other thing is sometimes estimates don't scale to match the project that you're working with. So you've built a number of small projects, now you're going to build a large project, and oftentimes it doesn't scale linearly as people expect. Now all these items are deterministic and they don't take the uncertainty into account. On top of that, uncertainties can build on one another to make the project very different from the one that was originally scoped. There's uncertainty in everything we do. The classic example is, how long does it take you to drive to work? For me, it takes me about 20 minutes to drive to work. But on a bad day, when it's snowing, in my part of the world, it snows a lot. It might take me 30 or 40 minutes to get to work, or maybe there's an accident or a construction crew along the way. And all those things will impact how long it takes me to get to work. And so here I am, I drive to work just about every day of my working life, except, and I can't tell you exactly how long it's going to take. But I can tell you that building some plant in the middle of nowhere that I've never built before is going to take me exactly 36 months. It's not realistic. So what we need is we need a probabilistic cost and schedule risk model. Now, why do we need both? Well, the reality is that there's a very tight correlation between cost and schedule. Again, going back to the Construction Owners Association of Alberta, on average, Alberta-based mega projects experience a 19% project cost growth and a 17% project schedule growth. So again, we're dealing with a tightly correlated relationship, and we need to make sure that if we're going to make decisions about spending more money to accelerate the schedule, for example, we need to understand what the impacts of that are going to look like. We can spend a lot of money and save no time on the schedule. So what we need is proper risk management. We need to be able to model our schedules and costs more accurately, limit our financial exposure. We need reproducible results that we can take from project to project to project to make sure we have a standard methodology and audit trail. We need to improve the likelihood of project success, give our project teams confidence in the results, and get them to buy in on those contingencies that come out of our model. We need to increase the maturity of our organization to make sure that things are done consistently. And finally, we need to store it all in a common database so we can always go back and look at it down the road and not lose a bunch of files. So, solution that we're talking about today is Safran risk analysis. Now, Safran risk analysis, it lets you put ranges on your estimates. It lets you model key risk events. And really, the thing that's really powerful is it allows you to model your cost and schedule together, but you can keep them separate where appropriate. So I'll talk a little bit more about this when we get to it, but this is very powerful because some items are related to the schedule and some are not. So we can choose in Safran which costs are schedule related and which costs are not schedule related. It allows us to do detailed logic uncertainty mappings. And ultimately, it allows us to really understand what's going on with our project, understand what's driving the project. It allows us to run different scenarios around our project and really evaluate our mitigation strategies to see which are the ones that are most cost effective and give us the best impact overall. So let's dive in. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, so this is what Safran risk looks like. So just a couple of things before we start. The first thing is that I can import files from Primavera through the XCR format. I can import Microsoft project files through the XML format. I can also import Safran files for those people who might be using Safran project. And the nice thing about the system is, unlike the older tools like Primavera Risk Analysis, which I used for many years, everything isn't stored in a flat file on your computer. It's stored in a SQL Server database. So everything gets kept on the database. It's easy to find. It's easy to work with. Now the system on the welcome page gives me a history of my old projects, so the last 10 that I opened. But there's a couple of other things before I open a project. The first one is we have a tab here called Global Risks. And the Global Risks allows us to create a list of risks that are typically going to happen on our project. So rather than typing in a risk register every single time, we can make a global list that people can pull in as appropriate. The other thing that we can do here is we can define global risk calendars. So if you have a number of projects that are all happening in the same part of the world, you can develop a risk calendar, which will allow you to reuse that calendar across many projects. Now, these calendars can be created through defining a formula in a template, or if you're working in an area where there's a lot of historical information from the Weather Service, for example, you can actually generate a probabilistic calendar from data that comes from the Weather Service. So if you're working on offshore oil and gas, for example, and you have to stop working when the wind's above a certain speed or the waves are above a certain height. And this field is mature, it's been running for 25 years, as all that data is available, you can generate these probabilistic calendars from those time series. In this example here, I created one, what's the probability of our facility being impacted by either a forest fire or we have to evacuate because there's a fire in the vicinity. So again, you can generate these and then they're available to all of the projects. So let's go back to the home screen and I'm just going to open a project. I'm going to open a very simple project here. It's called UAV Prototype. And this is a simple schedule, which is, as it says, the development of a unmanned air vehicle. So we're going to design this thing, we're going to build it, we're going to test it, we're going to try and bring it to market. Now, the thing about this this particular item, when I open it up, oh, and it just minimized on me, is it's going to let me, first of all, look at the schedule that comes up. And once the schedule is opened, then what I can do is I can work the schedule in Safran because it's built around Safran Project Manager. So Safran Project Manager is a lot like Primavera P6, and it gives me the ability to build full schedules in here if I want to. And it looks like for some reason it's not going to open, probably because I've been using it all day. So let me just close this and I'll just reopen it. Okay, so let me restart this program. There we go. Looks like something's wrong on my computer because it's not starting up. 1 second. Okay, it looks like it's come up now. There we go. Hang on, let me share my screen again. There we go. Okay, so as I was saying, the system will pop up and it will let you work within here, and you can have a full schedule in here. So you do have the ability in here to move around in the schedule. You can create filters, you can create layouts, you can do all the things that you would do in any scheduling tool. You can change your logic, you can look at your activity details, things like constraints and codes and everything else. All these things are available within the tool. So it's a full-featured scheduling tool, which gives you a lot of options in terms of working within the schedule. You don't necessarily have to go back to Primavera every time you want to work with the schedule. The next thing is that, again, the tabs come up and you will work from right or from left to right across the tabs as you build your risk model. So the next tab across is schedule warnings. And schedule warnings will let me take a look and see if there's any issues with my schedule. So it shows me things like open ends, things like that. So if I have an activity that has either no predecessors or no successors, I can fix that. So I can go to that particular activity. That's one I just created. And I can make sure that I link that activity in to the rest of my schedule. It will also tell me if I have any constraints that I need to deal with. So if I want to remove those constraints, I can as well. So if there's something in there that shouldn't be there, it can be removed as well. Now, the next tab across is our project risks. Now, one of the really nice things about Safran Risk is, unlike older tools like Primavera Risk Analysis, you don't put your uncertainties on the activities and put your risk events in a separate risk register. Everything goes into this risk register. So I basically can duplicate my project risk register into this particular module, and then I can assign these to the appropriate activities. So I have different risk types. I can have standard risks. So standard risks are those which have a defined probability of occurrence. And then I can define what the schedule impact and the cost impact is going to be of this risk event. Now, in this case, this one has a 40% probability of happening, but I can define any number from 1 to 100%. I can also create a calendar risk. So if I have my probabilistic calendars defined, I can create a calendar risk and associate that with activities. And it will show me here all of the activities that that particular calendar or risk has been associated with. Finally, I have estimate uncertainty risks. And estimate uncertainty risks are those which are 100% likely to occur, and they are, as it says, they're just uncertainties. So I can define uncertainty ranges. For those of you who've used Primavera Risk Analysis, this would be like using the templated quick risk function within Primavera Risk Analysis. So again, I can see where it's mapped. And by the way, for any of these risks, I can define a pre-mitigated position, but I can also define a post-mitigated position. So I can go in there and I can say, okay, after our mitigation exercise, I can define a different probability of occurrence or a different um, impact definition based on my mitigation strategies. I can also record any time or money spent in that mitigation strategy to make sure that when I actually run the risk model, I can see the full impact of my mitigation strategy. So I spent some time and I spent some money on the strategy, but will it pay off at the end of the day? Now that I've got all these risks in here, then what I can do is I can map them to my schedule. And again, the idea here is that I can go in and I can choose any particular activity in the schedule, and I can associate one or many risks with that particular activity. Now, in this case, you'll see that we've got our estimate uncertainty risks are on the left side, and they have round icons beside them. And the normal or the regular risks are on the right-hand side, and they have square boxes associated with them. Why are they different? Well, the idea here is I can only choose one of these estimate uncertainty values, or I can choose the none. But if I change it, the previously selected value will disappear. So I can only choose one of those. And that's in keeping with the idea this is estimate uncertainty, right? So it's a low estimate uncertainty, a medium estimate uncertainty, or a high estimate uncertainty. It's not going to be both of them. The second section, where I have my normal risks here, is I can choose as many as I like. And if I choose a particular activity that has more than one associated with it, down on the tab at the bottom, under risks, I can see all the risks that are associated with this particular activity in the schedule. And I can click on schedule impact, and it will show me this is each of the risks that you've assigned. Here's what they look like. And here's what the overall distribution shape on this particular activity is going to look like. So again, I can see the black bar represents my deterministic duration. The gray bar represents my mean duration, and the rest of the histogram represents all of the possible outcomes based on each of these risks. Now, if I were to add another risk in there, I'd immediately see the shape would change, and now it's going to show me what my new shape looks like. Now, the really nice thing about this is it allows me to preview what the impact of my risks on each activity are going to look like. And one of the challenges that often happens is someone will put a risk on an activity, that's out of range. For example, I might have a 1 month activity and I put on a risk that has a 2 to 3 year impact. Well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? Worst case scenario, a 1 month activity is probably going to go to 2 or 3 months. It's not going to go to 2 or 3 years. So as soon as I click on a new risk, I can see what it's going to look like, and it allows me to catch errors before I run the whole model and I have to figure out what went wrong. Um, so the next tab over is the cost module, which I'm going to come back to at the end of my presentation. Let's move on to the correlation module. So correlation is one of those things that often there's a lot of discussion about. Should things be correlated? Is the central limit theorem a big issue on our project? Those sorts of things. And in older tools like Primavera Risk Analysis, you would correlate activities together. But here, instead, what we do is we correlate risks together. So the idea is if one risk happens, what's the probability that another risk is going to happen? And by doing that, it gives us a lot of flexibility in the modeling. So let me just simplify this because there's a lot of information here. I'm just going to show the pre-mitigated risks. And what I'm going to do is, in this case, I've got an impact for probability that risk is going to occur, the impact if the risk does occur on schedule, and then also on cost. So the idea here is it gives me a grid pattern, and I can choose to correlate any two risks together. Now the dark line down the middle is the intersection of the two the identical items on the same or the identical items in the two axes. That's why they're grayed out. But I can enter all of these in, so I can say, okay, if we have trouble with driving piles, we're probably going to have trouble with excavation because probably the soils report is bad. So it gives us a lot of capability in terms of doing our correlation. And it's very flexible and very easy to work with. The next tab over, which is the script tab, is gives us the ability to put our own custom code into a risk model. So many years ago, Primavera Risk Analysis had this using a Visual Basic function where you could say, okay, for example, if I'm a certain percentage complete on my project, I can complete the project maybe while it's in transit to the job site. And so what you can do is you can evaluate as the model runs different scenarios and change the way the model works based on those scenarios. In the case of Primavera Risk Analysis, people really liked that function because it gave a lot of flexibility. But eventually they broke it because they no longer had an agreement for licensing around the Visual Basic model, so they just turned it off. So it stopped working, and it frustrated a lot of power users of Primavera Risk Analysis. Well, here in Safran, it's available, so we can use it. All right, so let's go to the Analyze tab. Now, I mentioned before that I can have pre and post mitigated positions for any of my risks. So here in the Analysis tab, I can choose whether I want to run a pre-mitigated or a post-mitigated position for any of my risks. Now, this is really good because I'm working with a client right now where we're looking at a lot of different scenarios. So what happens if we don't get this permit? Well, we run the model with the permit turned on. What happens if we want to completely remove that risk and run the model? Well, we can turn the risk off completely by clearing the checkbox. What if we want to run in the post-mitigated position? Well, we can just change the radio button from pre to post. And we can do all of this various scenario analysis very quickly and very easily in the tool. So it makes it very powerful. The other thing that I can do, and for those of you who worked with risk analysis tools before, it's oftentimes you don't really care about the final activity in the entire schedule. What you care about is perhaps the finish of construction or the finish of commissioning. And there might be, after those activities, there might be a whole bunch of demobilization and site cleanup and all sorts of crap that you don't really care about in the risk model. What you care about is when is construction finished, when is commissioning and startup finished. So I can create what are called focus activities. And focus activities just lets me go into the schedule and choose any particular activity that I care about, and I can make it a focus activity. When I do that, this activity then becomes available for me to very quickly go to. Similarly, I can do that for my costs off my cost worksheet as well. Now, I'm going to just set these all back to my pre-mitigated position. Now, the other thing I can do here is I can tell the system that I want to step through the analysis. And this is pretty much common with most other tools out there. But when I run the analysis, what it's going to do is it's going to take me to the Gantt chart, and it's going to let me see on the Gantt chart exactly what's going on. So I can move around in the chart, and I can see what each iteration is doing. Let me just see if I can move this dialog box out of the way. Come on. It's not going to let me. Okay. So as I step through my iterations, I can see each time I click, I can see that the schedule is moving the way I expect it to move. Okay. Now, I can continue to do this until I'm convinced, there we go, that I'm convinced that everything's working properly. And I can basically step through the model. I want to make sure that all my activities are moving the way I expect them to. I can scroll up and down in the model, and I can step around. Again, just making sure that everything's working the way I expect. When I get tired of doing the steps, because I told it to do 1,000 iterations, I'm not going to click 1,000 times, I can hit complete. Now, when I do that, the system runs, and it will come up with my distribution graph, which essentially shows me the results of my analysis. Now, just a quick orientation for anybody who may not have used one of these before. Essentially what the system is doing is it's telling me how often each particular date on the y-axis came up in my 1,000 iterations. So on the left y-axis, it says 0, 50, 100, 150, 200. That's the number of times the date on the the date on the x-axis across the bottom came up. So for example, if I was to say, okay, here's 2015, September 1st, it came up about 50 times out of 1,000 iterations. Now, the line drawn here, the black line that goes up, represents cumulative hits. So essentially what we can say is that if we look at our 50% line here, 50% of the time we finished on or before December 29th, 2015. Okay, so it's saying that 50% of the hits happened on or before this particular date. Now, if I'm looking for a P70 or P80 value, I can go up and say, okay, my P80 value is March the 2nd, 2016. I can see that there. Okay, so the system gives me a lot of information in here about when I'm likely to finish. Now, as I mentioned before, I can choose my focus activities. So I can click on focus activities and choose the ones that I care about, and I can see the distribution for those activities. Or if I want to just wade through the whole schedule, I can do that as well. I can actually go in and choose any particular activity in the schedule and see what the distribution looks like for that particular activity. Now, the next thing the system does is it allows me to look at a tornado plot. So a tornado plot is a way for us to see the items which are impacting the schedule the largest amount. So let's just look first of all at the one on the left. This is the risks driving the finish date of the project. So what this is telling me is that my ash cloud risk is the highest impact, followed by my communication risk, my testing overrun risk, and finally my procurement delays, if I look at the top four. And you can see that they've got a percentage beside them, and that percentage represents the correlation between changes to that particular risk and changes to the overall schedule. So if I look at the ash cloud risk, it's at 59%, the procurement delays at 28%, which means that approximately the ash cloud is having about twice as much impact as procurement delays are. The actual percentages aren't that important. The relative percentages are what we look at. Now, this is looking at this on a risk basis. So this is going back to my list of risks. And because I've associated those risks with many activities, the system is telling me, okay, these are the risks that are having the biggest impact. When these risks fire, they're having a large impact overall. But I can also look at this on a schedule activity basis. And that's my second tornado. And what this is telling me is these are the activities that are driving the project. So again, I can look at it from a risk basis, or I can look at it from an activity basis to understand the things that I'm going to work on next to reduce the overall impact on my project. Now, there's also in here the ability to do sensitivity analysis. Now, this is something that's very powerful. So, um, years ago, when I used to work with clients in Primavera risk analysis, the question that would always come up from the project team was, okay, you've shown us the tornado plot, and you've said that ash cloud is 59% correlation to the project. But what does that mean to me as a project manager? What I want to know is, if I get rid of that risk, how much time am I going to save on my project? And that's what the sensitivity analysis allows us to do. It allows us to choose a confidence level. So in this case, I'm going to say at my P70 confidence level, how much time can I save by getting rid of these risks? And what the system does is it turns off a risk, and then it reruns the analysis. Then it turns off the next risk, the next highest risk, and reruns the analysis. And then the next highest risk again. So it tells us incrementally how much time we can save by getting rid of our highest impact risks. So let me just run that analysis. So the system's running through. It's doing multiple passes, as I said. So it's turning off the first risk, rerunning and evaluating what's the next highest risk. Then what's the next highest risk after that, and the next highest risk after that. And what it's going to tell us is it's going to tell us what are the items that are really having a huge impact overall on our project. Okay, so what it's telling me is if you can get rid of the ash cloud, you can save 26 days. If you can get rid of testing overrun, you can save 34 days. Okay, and I can define how many of these I want it to run for. In this case, I told it the top 5. So the system's going to tell me exactly how many days I can save incrementally by turning off each of these risks. So I can also look at that on an S-curve basis. So here's my original run with all the risks turned on, and here's my saving incrementally by turning off each individual risk. So again, this is very powerful because it lets you answer the question that the project team always asks, which is exactly how much time can I save by getting rid of that particular risk? Okay, so I've talked about schedule risk. Let's talk about cost risk. So one of the biggest challenges that's always come along when people have done schedule and cost risk analysis is that they're very different animals. So initially, what everyone did is they did a cost risk analysis and they did a schedule risk analysis, and then they might have kind of looked at them together, or they might have just kept them completely separate. But people started to realize, well, cost and schedule are intrinsically linked. I can't just look at one and not look at the other. So then what people said was, okay, let's take the results of the schedule risk model and put those results into the cost risk model. Well, that was better, but it still wasn't great because you were still choosing which items, and maybe choosing the top couple items and moving them from one to the other. You weren't looking at everything. And maybe there were some schedule items that actually had a much larger impact. They showed up as small impacts on the schedule, but they had a large impact on the cost side. So those would tend to get missed. So the next thing people did is they said, okay, well, let's take a tool like Primavera Risk Analysis. And what we're going to do is we're going to build a resource loaded schedule. Well, that works too. And that actually gets around the problem of understanding all those relationships. So, every cost is there, every schedule item is there, every schedule activity is there. But this is still not great because building a resource loaded schedule and making it match your cost is actually really hard. And it gets harder and harder as time goes on because you're starting to spend money, so the costs are changing. And you basically have to rebuild this resource loaded schedule with every resource or with every schedule update. You need to change all the resource assignments to make it all balance again. So it's a lot of work. It can be done, but it's really hard. So people stopped doing it because it was just too hard to maintain. So Safran looked at that and said, okay, well, what could we do that would make it a whole lot easier? So they said, okay, people want to do a cost analysis in a cost analysis tool like At Risk or Crystal Ball. Why don't we give them that as its own module so that people can do cost risk analysis there? So what they did is they developed the cost module, which is kind of like a spreadsheet format. And the idea is you can put your cost line items in. And once you've got your cost line items in, you can go and you can put in all of your uncertainties and all of your risks. Let me just turn off a couple of columns here because I'm used to using it on my big screen, so I can turn everything on, but it's a little hard to see on my smaller screen. Okay, so what I can do here is for each of these, for example, construction resources, I can define the cost line item, in this case, $470,000. I can define a base uncertainty, which can be from 376 to $505,000. I can also associate risks from the risk module. Any of the risks that have cost elements associated with them will show up here. And I can choose these risk items and I can assign them. So when I do that, what it's going to do is it's going to assign the risk to the activity, or sorry, to the line item in my cost worksheet, so that when that risk fires, it will have an impact on my cost. So that's great. That allows me to associate any number of risks or uncertainties with my cost worksheet. But remember what I said was that the issue we really wanted to get around was linking some of these items to the schedule. Now, some of them I don't want to link to the schedule. So for example, legal costs, I probably don't have to link that to the schedule. But hiring the test site, I probably do, because I'm gonna I'm leasing a site. If the project goes long, I'm gonna pay more money for that site. So there's an example of something that probably does need to be related to the schedule. So here's the really great thing that they've built into Safran, and that's the ability to choose a cost item and link it to a schedule item. So what I'm going to do is let me just turn on the schedule section again. Let's look at how that works. So what I can do here is, for example, hire the test site. I can say, okay, I've got this $590,000 for this line item. Now, not all of it's going to be schedule related, only some of it. So what I can do is I can tell the system here that some or all of this are related to my schedule. So in this case, what I said is 40% of the cost of hiring the test site is schedule related, and here's the activity it's related to. So now what happens is it takes that 40%, links it to the schedule, and now when that activity goes long, the price will go up. When the activity goes short, the price will go down. So now 40% of that $590,000 is linked to the schedule. The remaining 60% is not. And I can see that here. It tells me that the variable portion of this is $236,000, which is linked to that activity. The 354,000 remainder, the 60%, is fixed. So it will not vary with the duration of this activity. Now, I can link this to more than one activity if I want. I can link to multiple activities. So here under assembly resources, I've linked it to two activities. I've linked 50% to the fuel system and 10% to the engine components. So, I can link it to multiple activities and put different percentages on each activity. So this gives us a lot of capability within the system of developing that integrated cost and schedule model. And by the way, I can see, just like I could in the schedule side, I can see what the risks are associated with this particular line item. Let me just pull this up a little. There we go. So I can see which risks are associated with this line item, and I can also see what the cost impact is going to look like. Okay, so that's a bad example because it's a hammock, but here's a different one. So I can see that I've got these items linked, and I can see what the overall distribution is going to look like on this particular cost line item. So just like I could with the schedule, I can see if I put in something that makes no sense because it'll come up with a strange distribution that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Now, when I run the analysis, what I can do is, again, I can go back to the analysis. When I do the step through, I can also go and I can choose, rather than look at how the schedule is doing, I can go to the cost module. And again, I can step through and it will show me which of my risks is firing at any particular time. So the risks will light up when they're firing. And let me just turn on another column here. I'm gonna go right to the bottom. Iteration value, okay, it's on. So let me scroll over so we can see it. And then this iteration value shows me for each step what's happening on my cost worksheet. So again, the risks light up, they change color when they're firing, so I can see what's going on. So again, I can see which ones are firing or not firing. And I can see the overall impact. In this case, parts supply just fired on all 4 of these line items, and I can see what the impact is on my overall cost. So if I scroll up to the top, I can see my overall cost, which went from about $8 million up to about $9.6 million. So again, I can step through and I'm happy that things are moving the way that I expect them to move. I can hit complete. And this time what I can do is I can go and I can look at all the same tools, like the distribution graph, for example, but now I can look at it on a cost basis. So in this case, again, I can see overall what my overall cost of the project is going to look like. I can see my probabilities, so I can develop my confidence levels and my contingencies. And again, just like I could with my focused tasks, I can look at focused costs. So here's the ones I defined as my focus cost. Maybe I want to look at my project management cost, and there it is. So, I can see exactly where I'm going to end up with on my overall project on my cost basis. Now, remember, this has all been linked to the schedule. So any of the schedule related costs are going to automatically show up here. Now, I can also look at my drivers on a cost basis. So again, if I go over to cost, now it shows me these are the cost items that are having a big impact. So as you can see, parts supply is huge, much larger than anything else. And what I can do is, again, I can do the sensitivity analysis, but in this case, I'm going to do it on a cost basis. I can run the impacts again, and I can see what my impacts are going to be from a cost basis. So there's the first run with all of my cost risks turned on. And there it is with my first risk, which is testing overrun, turned off. And the next one, which is design specifications. And again, it's showing me how much money I'm going to save by getting rid of each of these incrementally in my schedule or in my cost estimate. Okay, so I can see over here, you see on the left, it's doing the last iteration here. So if I can turn off testing overrun, I can save $165,000. If I can turn off design specifications, I can save $180,000. So again, it's showing me exactly how much I can save by getting rid of each of these risks. Now, this is all well and good, but now I want to talk about the thing that doing an integrated cost and schedule analysis really lets me get to, and that is done through the scatter plot. So when I look at my overall project, I can look at it normally if I'm working in 2 separate systems, I can look at my distribution on a cost basis, or I can look at my distribution on a schedule basis, but I have no way of looking at both of them together. Now, the thing is, if I complete my project on time, but I'm over budget, no one's going to say I had a successful project. Similarly, if I'm on budget, but I'm over time, no one's going to say I had a successful project. And what I really want to understand is, how do I get success in both? So when I look at this, what the system tells me is, let's go back to the distribution graph for 1 second. What the distribution graph tells me for my overall project is that my deterministic value has a probability of success of 15%. So I'm 15% likely to bring my project in on budget. If I look at it on a schedule basis, it tells me that I'm 8% likely to bring my project in on schedule. Now, when I look at the scatter plot, it tells me that I'm only 2% likely to achieve both cost and schedule. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, what that means is, if although I have a 15% chance of being on budget, which essentially would be represented by this horizontal line here. So 15% of the hits are below this horizontal line, which represents my budget. I had a 15% chance. So 150 of these 1,000 dots achieved my goals from a cost perspective. Now, only 8% of the hits showed me being successful on a schedule basis, and that's represented by this vertical line. So everything to the left of the vertical line, so quadrants 1 and 4, if we were to count them anti-clockwise, all of these represent 80 iterations where I was successful in achieving my schedule. However, overall, between those two, I'm only 2% likely to be successful. Well, what I really want is, I want a joint confidence level, or what we call the JCL, of 70%. I don't want 70% in one and nothing in the other. I want to be able to report to management exactly where I need to be to have a joint confidence level. Now, to do that, you'll see that there's a color coding here, and up at the top it says, okay, your joint confidence level of 0 to 20% is in green, 20 to 50 is in yellow, 50 to 70 is in orange, 70 to 100 is in red. So I said I wanted a joint confidence level of 70%. So in order to achieve that, I need to be right on the border between the orange dots and the red dots. And you can see that let's just follow the first line of red dots. If I hover over one, you see that's slightly over 70%. But if I follow this, you can see that it's a vertical line that transitions down here to a horizontal line. Now, when it's vertical, that basically means that I can spend as much money as I want, right? I can spend more costs, but I'm not going to save any time. Similarly, when it becomes horizontal, the system's saying, okay, you can give up as much time as you want, but you're not going to save any money. So the project team, though, can manipulate their targets within a range here where there's a curve. So where it goes from being totally vertical, it curves down and becomes totally horizontal. And in that area, or that continuum of points, I can make some trade-offs. I can say, okay, I can spend a bit of money and I can save some time. And so the project team can decide if it's worth spending time or money to make sure that they're on that joint confidence level 70% line. Some people call this the JCL necklace, because the dots look a bit like a pearl necklace. But the nice thing about this is, it tells me exactly what trade-offs I can make as a project team. So I can give up some schedule to save some cost, or I can spend some money to save some schedule. And it gives me that ability to really understand those trade-offs between the two. And you can't do this unless you do everything in one system. So that's kind of the power of Safran. And I didn't mention this before, but one of the things that happened when Safran decided to develop this product, they actually went back to the guys who originally developed PertMaster. PertMaster is the first scheduling analysis tool that I worked with. And when Oracle bought Primavera, it became Primavera Risk Analysis, which is the tool that a lot of people still use today. But that tool was developed back in about 2000, 2001. And I mentioned I started working with it back in 2001. But the same guys who developed that tool went to Safran, and they developed this tool with the idea, okay, if we were to develop PertMaster 2.0, with all the things we learned in the last 20 years, what would we do differently? And they used that to develop this tool. So it's a very powerful tool, and there's a lot of experience behind it in the way that it works. Okay, so I'm going to open it up to questions now. We have about 10 minutes left. If you'd like to submit any questions, please feel free to do so. And I see Donna's put a poll out there. So feel free to answer the poll as well. And the poll is just basically, why do you want to do risk analysis? So feel free to answer that. It looks like most people are saying they need to run their projects better. All of these things are important. The last one I would choose would be client makes us, because that's really not a great reason to be doing it. But it looks like we have a split between people who want to run their projects better and people who help them do better bids and estimates. So that's great. That's really good information. Now, the tool is really good at that. Now, I'll be taking questions. So if you want to ask any questions, please feel free to do so. Go and type them in the questions box. There's a question here. Can you incorporate your cost model in at-risk to the Safran risk to undertake an integrated risk model and analysis? So the quick answer is you can, to a degree. So some of the formulas and things you would have in at-risk would not probably come over. The Safran has a very robust import-export process through Excel. So any of these things that I want to work with, I can import or export through Excel. So at-risk itself is built in Excel, so you might have to do a little bit of manipulation in terms of columns and orders and things like that, but you can definitely bring virtually any cost model or any cost estimate in here without having to type everything in manually. So I use that a lot. I get a lot of clients who send me a risk register, and I don't want to type it all into the project risks, so I just import it. Similarly with the cost model, they send me a cost breakdown and I import that. They send me a schedule, usually a Primavera schedule, and I import that. So the system is very much built around the idea that you can very easily import and export things. Okay, any other questions at this point? Feel free to type them in, and I'll stop the screen share and I'll just finish up my slides. So if there's any questions, I'll answer them after that. So there's a ton of clients that Safran has, some of these that we work with and some of that they have with other clients. One of the things that's been really interesting is that there's been a very large take up of the idea of doing integrated cost and schedule analysis on very large government projects, specifically energy projects in the United States, oil projects in Norway. There's been rail projects in Britain, ship projects in Spain. So a lot of interest in these sort of government, quasi-government projects around integrated cost and schedule. And by the way, the idea of doing integrated cost and schedule has been identified as a best practice by AACE. So for those of you who are interested in that, there are a number of papers on the AACE website about integrated cost and schedule analysis. And some of those are also available on Safran's website. So if you go to safran.com, there's a number of really good white papers there about why you should do integrated cost and schedule analysis. All right, looks like we don't have any other questions and we're almost out of time, so we'll give another moment. But if anyone would like to contact us for more information, my contact information is here. You can also see information on our website. And also there is, as I mentioned before, a lot of information on Safran's site. Plus you can download a demo, a 30-day demo of the software as well if you'd like to try it out. If you do download it, and if you're a Primavera risk analysis user or an Acumen risk user, those two tools are very similar in the way that they work. Safran approaches the problem a little differently. So if you If you need a little help to get started, let us know, and we're happy to spend a bit of time with you to make sure that you can get rolling on things. I admit that when I started using the tool the first time, I got very frustrated and had to put the tool down for a week, and then come back to it. And I made a couple calls to people I knew at Safran who helped me through it. Once I started working with it, I realized just how powerful this tool really is. So if you need help, feel free to reach out to myself, also to Donna in the Philippines, who looks after our business in Asia Pacific, and we can help you out. Looks like there's a couple more questions. Okay, so a question is, to have a good integrated cost and schedule, you needed to resource load your schedule, but we hardly have one today. So I mentioned this briefly before. I find that having an integrated cost, a resource loaded schedule is a lot of work. It is very hard to achieve. So in Safran, you can have a separate cost and schedule, and you can link them as appropriate, but you don't have to build that resource loaded schedule, which is so much work. Can you display a combination of WBS and activity codes? Yeah, so the tool actually works with all the WBS and activity codes that you've built in Primavera if you're using that. So you can group and sort and filter on codes. I use that all the time because typically when I get a schedule from a client, it has a WBS, it has activity codes, and it really lets me filter and work with the material. The other thing that I really like about it is if I am in the schedule module and I'm on the home screen, if I turn on a filter, so I've got a number of filters defined here, but if I have one of these turned on, I'm just trying to find one that will actually show up here. I don't think any of these will work on this particular model. But the idea here is once I've created all of these filters, it's very easy for me to turn the filter on. And then once I've turned the filter on, when I go back over to the risk mapping tab, the filter that's turned on in the schedule tab will also be applied to the mapping here. So it'll help me deal with smaller data sets. So very powerful. Does Safran get benchmarking data from previous projects? So you can enter benchmarking data from other projects in here. That's a good practice, particularly when you're defining what your project risks are. If you can get historical information, that's very useful. The system itself does not do benchmarking across industries, but if you've done benchmarking on your own, you can easily incorporate that into the model. So as I said, I think we're just about out of time. So thanks very much for joining us tonight. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or any additional questions, and download the software, try it out. Reach out to us when you do so, though, because as I said, I hate to hear that people downloaded it and got frustrated. So if you do get stuck, please let us know, and we're happy to help you out. So thank you very much for joining us, and with that, we'll end it for this meeting.